to do at the beginning. And so I think that the most effective interventions take a proactive, universal approach, which then can stave off some of the manifestations of what we see in schools in the first place.
I'm going to get you for that, but I'm giving my back to these folks. I don't know who was first.
So I actually am from Rutgers Medical Center, and I can tell you that I don't think any one entity can do any of this. That's just an obvious. But I think there are institutional problems with healthcare in general, and when you break down by zip code, and you know where the trauma lies and where the issues are, then care has to be provided according to the need of the community. Some of the issues, and I don't know if Mark is still here, but I can appreciate, and I think whatever the law can do, if it's going to address what is expected of schools to provide where we know these issues are, it should also address what is expected for healthcare system to be able to provide. And it has to include reimbursement for services that don't wait until you're ill. So in the current world, we don't treat you. Well, we can treat you, but we won't get reimbursed for it unless we are a licensed clinician, which requires you to have a pathology, and so that pathologizes you automatically when you walk across the threshold. So I think that whatever we do, we have to adjust the expectation that if we know these things exist in the community, we can't wait until you have this illness or this school problem or this consequence of your trauma to address your trauma. We have to assume it's there, we have to build it into our practice, and we have to bring it to the community at all different levels: school, healthcare, food and nutrition, and all of the things that go into keeping our family and community safe and moving forward.
And I just want to say on this institutional piece, and I really appreciate that and piece here about maternal and child health. You know, the institutional interaction that people have in any community is intersectional, right? And so we rely upon, other than our families, probably the most important institution in terms of whether we have real opportunity, we rely on a range of institutions, and their work intersects constantly in our lives to help produce good, bad, or neutral outcomes. So it's not as if we ever asked one institution to do all this work, and one institution never did all the work, either in creating inequality or in creating, you know, privilege working, right? So we're always trying to think about the intersectionality of different institutions, their operations, and the rules and norms by which they work. And so I also appreciate what you're saying about, well, we have to look at these rules. I mean, if we're going to do equity, right? If we're interested in inequality, we have to do equity. We have to meet people where they are. We have to have rules that work for them. And if the rules consistently don't work for them and produce bad outcomes, well, that's the definition of crazy, right? You just keep going and thinking you're going to get a different result. So that's part of the madness that we're trying to overcome, but it becomes a little clearer, I hope, through the lens of structural inequality, to recognize how all these things work together, that we really have not sort of designed our institutions to work better with people where they are and to work with each other where they are.
No, I'm sort of like, you know, living here in the city for all this time. I think the wraparound services are necessary because a lot of things you're talking about require wraparound services for families. It's just not one person. And, you know, whenever I bring up drugs, everybody kind of poo-poos it. So I keep bringing it up because if you're not dealing with that, then I really, as somebody who's lived in Newark all my life, I wonder what your motivations are. So I can tell you that we're not looking at the families and the services that the family needs, but then that goes back to the funding sources. And I know money is not everything, but that goes back to the availability of funds for the families. If they're low income and they don't have insurance, they don't have insurance. The average salary in Newark was like $23,000, right? These are people working 2 and 3 jobs. They have no health care, right? And look at the attack on UMD&J, which was like a primary source for people without health care. So we have to look at the realities, and I think sometimes it's difficult when you do it from a scholarly point of view as opposed to living it. When you live in it, and we need to talk to more people who are living it, because they know where the gaps are. When you're doing the work and you're researching, that's different from living the life and know where the gaps are. So I think we need to include people in decision making who have lived through that, so we can get real world ideas of where the gaps are, so we can look at what's really going to prevent them. But family is really important. And I always go back to civics, so that's about making elected officials accountable to you, so you can make sure that the tax money that you give up is allocated for your community, so you have the resources to give the wraparound services that include all the things you're talking about, like hospitals and mental health services. If there's no money, especially for people who are working, making $23,000, where's the money coming from? Where's the money coming from? So we need to be more real, and we need to include people in decision-making who are having these experiences. And it's similar to the correction system. We have people who are making the money in it, but they not live that life.
Somebody in the middle? Yeah.
I don't think this is, maybe this isn't gonna be so intelligent, but, you know, I was so interested, I'm Lisa Block, I work at the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey. We've been seeding some programs in Newark, which is our boundary area for funding, to strengthen trauma-informed practices with law enforcement, and the community is one area, and also responding to the clamoring of principals for trauma-sensitive environments and direct services for children, because trauma is a thing. And, you know, I'm trying to be very sensitive to that this is a process, and it's really difficult. You know, how do you engage a family or a child, and not just a child that went crazy in the classroom that day, but, you know, what's the language, and who is the person to build that rapport, and so on, and then prevention in neighborhoods, building assets of other types. But so because of your center, I was so interested to be here. What is the conversation? You have wonderful speakers. And thinking, what is your role in changing policies? There are barriers. I mean, we have the issue of going back to local control. We have the limitations of funding out of school districts. Then there are barriers in bringing mental health services into school settings where you could bill, as if you're a provider, where you could have it in a school-based health center. There are limitations that are unreasonable that are at the state level. So I thought, can you influence that without, it's not maybe a lawsuit, but it's a different advocacy role for lawyers in policy, affecting policy change.
Well, that's what we're and others are trying to do. Susan, did you want to? I think I'm going to have to give Susan the last word so we can move to Bonnie.
I just want to say, I'm in a lot of discussions, you know, sort of the national level, or, you know, all the different groups trying to say, you know, how do we do this? And I think it's a mistake, and it happens all the time, because I'm obviously very focused on schools as a starting place. But then there are others who say, no, it's the community, no, it's this, no, it's that, and we end up in these sort of debates. And I don't think those are the right debates. I think they're all important, and that the problem that I see in the discussion, and I hope that our next conference that David will organize, one of us will, you know, we can talk about this, that if we take a whole child approach and put the child and the family at the center, and then draw circles the way Ron from Brainerd did around what's closest to the child, what's going to affect the child, and then we ask what you ask of our institutions, whether you're in health, education, elsewhere, housing, you know, can't we find a shared vocabulary about what kids need and where they need to get to go, so that we can all work from our different perches and perspectives in a shared agenda? You know, are we, let's say, you know, do we want kids to have relationships, better relationships? Do we want them to learn to
Right.
self-regulate their emotions and behaviors better? Do we want them to be academically successful, go on to achieve and post-secondary, etc.? If we could all agree, you know, and forget fighting where it starts, because we all have our hearts come from one place or another, and a shared vocabulary, we might get a shared agenda, and the voice might get louder. I think there's been a real problem. I was fortunate to be in a conference called Trauma in the Villages, the African American community talking about trauma, and the voice was so powerful, poignant, like yours and yours, just so powerful, and yet it's not getting heard, and we have to ask why. And I don't think we should be fighting, I think we all have a huge role to play. But those are my two questions. Can we get a shared vocabulary among us, and can we get this amazing voice out there? Because in some ways, we set up our own barriers.
Well, thank you. Listen, I just want to note, though, it's a lot of institutions. This is just a partial list. And what this partial list looks like is community, right? And this is sort of how your world works. It works in housing policy, in schools, and local government agencies, it works in healthcare, it works in police and criminal justice, your sense of safety. If you don't trust your police, versus if your police are trusted members of your community and you feel like everything you do there is an expression of personal freedom. Transportation, you can't get to jobs, you can't get to the supermarkets, you can't get your kid to childcare without spending an hour and a half on the train or on 3 buses, and it costs too much. These are the kinds of setbacks that wear away at people, that make them brittle when their resources are already thin. And of course, economic employment and economic development. If you have a city that is giving all its tax breaks away to developers and doesn't bother to try to seek local employment, you got a problem, particularly if unemployment in particular neighborhoods is 24, 46, 50%, right? And we see this in lots and lots of cities. So that's how these things come together, right? These are the constraints on families. This is the stuff that comes down to children, right? And so when we talk about widening inequality, we're not just talking about income, right? And we're not just talking about the manifestation of all this inequality in the schools as we see traumatized children come in and try to learn in the best way they can. We're talking about this web of institutional failure, that repeats itself again and again and again. We can hold a conference tomorrow on housing. We can talk about all the same things, right? We can have a police and criminal justice conversation tomorrow and talk about all the same things. So the point I just want to leave you with is, this is the work of overcoming structural inequality, right? From my standpoint, because I can't pretend to know about schools the way you do, or know about psychology or neurobiology the way you do. I'm trying to see where all these threads come together, right? And they come together in our psyches, and they come together in our relationships, and they come together in our behavior with each other. But they are manifestations also of our relationships to a whole bunch of institutions that operate, sometimes with terrific resources and oftentimes with very few. Sometimes with wonderful rules that really help us, and norms that recognize our humanity, and others that dehumanize us on a consistent basis. And that's the work. That's the work that we're trying to do. So, I'm going to seamlessly, if you like anything, wait till you hear this next one. All right? This is the right person to close us. Okay? Dr. Bonita Veysey gave me this wonderful bio to read. She's a professor. Oh, you didn't want me to do it. All right. Just so you know, okay. She's a professor at the School of Criminal Justice here. She really does so many wonderful things, but she's also an assistant vice chancellor. She has really helped to.
If you're gonna do it right.
She's helped to actualize the strategic plan. She's running the P3 collaboratory. Prior to her employment here, she was a senior research associate at Policy Research Associates in Del Mar, New York. During that time, she was director of the Women's Program Corps, associate director of the National Gains Center, a policy and technical assistance center that provides guidance and support on mental health and substance abuse treatment to institutional and community corrections agencies across the U.S. She was also a primary researcher in the area of mental health, criminal justice systems interaction, and as a result, she's had many years of experience in working with justice agencies. Since then, she continues to work with justice agencies to build organizational infrastructure to create and sustain enhanced clinical and justice practices, including trauma-informed systems of care in Western Massachusetts, conditions of confinement and treatment practices in Vermont and New Hampshire DOCS, Department of Corrections, trauma-specific and informed services and supports in Louisiana and New Mexico, youth detention facilities, and peer-to-peer reentry support models in Southern California. This is a real expert. She is a live wire and a beautiful human being. She continues to consult with local communities to help develop comprehensive supports for people in recovery from addictions, physical and sexual abuse, and mental health problems, and those returning from jail or prison. And now I'm stalling because I'm trying to get her PowerPoint up. Because technical, we're always one click away, right? We're always one click. There it is. All right. Okay. And here we go. Dr. Bonnie Veysey.
Wow, you made it through to the end of the day. Kind of makes you remember what it was like to be in elementary school, huh? So I'm going to take a very different perspective on this. How many of you are parents? How many of you are grandparents? How many of you have ever been a child? I think I'm still there. I'm told by people who know me well that they do have hope that I will reach the emotional age of double digits before I die. So I titled this, I'm going to mess this up too, by the way. I titled this Cautionary Tales and Cause for Hope. I want you to think deeply about what you remember about being a child. So we had this wonderful, wonderful discussion about what we can do to make institutional change to help kids. I hear a lot of this, and I was frankly educated to be a clinician and educated to know what's best. But when do we ask the kids? So I want you to remember what we learned today. I want you to think about the causes and the consequences of trauma, how trauma is unequally distributed and the economic and racial implications of those things, how children who display trauma in schools have traditionally been treated, mistreated, and punished, and how we can mobilize to address trauma in young people's lives. But don't forget the kids. And I mean this. Please don't forget the kids. This is where I want you to imagine your children, your grandchildren, or yourself when you were little. Children are amazing. They have amazing resiliencies, and they have deep, deep wisdom. So I want to tell you about the lessons I have learned from kids. They of course have many, many more lessons to share with us, but I'm only going to focus on 5. It's not up to us to determine what is traumatic. We often think about implementing screening and assessment checklists so that we can better understand what children have been exposed to. We look at symptom checklists to see how children are behaving. But I want to tell you this story. I was consulting in a Louisiana youth detention facility, and there was a 15, 16-year-old boy who was being held there. The staff knew that he had been sexually abused by his grandfather. They also knew that his grandfather had just passed away. The young man was clearly having a difficult time, and the staff decided that he really needed to participate in treatment to address his sexual abuse. That was the expert saying what this child needed. He refused. The staff missed the point. You see, he loved his grandfather deeply. That's the complications, the complex situations that children find themselves in. He missed him. He missed his grandfather deeply. He was grieving, but no one could acknowledge this fact. It's just too uncomfortable for us. And give him the permission and space to grieve. Now, if you remember Trauma 101, you know that the primary injury in traumatic events is the loss of control. Yet the clinical staff took away his voice and his choice. His refusal, in fact, led to a longer detention stay because he was labeled treatment resistant. How we hurt kids when we don't listen. I don't know if you know Rachel Naomi Raymond. She's absolutely one of my absolute favorite doctors. And she says about doctors, most of us don't really listen. Oh, I forgot the picture. Oh, there we go, sorry. Most of us don't really listen. Often, when we listen, we're looking only to figure out where someone is broken so that we can fix them. But sick people aren't broken, they're just sick. And they can be growing in power and in scope, can be so much more whole than they were before they were sick. There's a certain kind of listening that's expectant but not demanding. Listen simply to know. Listen to understand how it is with the other person. Listen so that he or she is not alone. We need to listen carefully with our hearts. Second, trauma doesn't always look like distress. The way kids exhibit distress is so varied. So I'm going to take you back a little bit, and then I'm going to say something that's very uncomfortable for me, but I will tell you anyway. When I worked with my partners in Massachusetts in the Women in Violence study, we told our own stories and tracked the effect of trauma and our personal trajectories to where we found ourselves. Many followed a very typical pattern of reaching rock bottom and building ourselves up piece by piece, but some didn't. Me, for example, I was sexually abused by my brother when I was little. I buried myself in school. I was terribly independent. I would leave the house in the morning, I wouldn't come back. And I was rarely at home. My fear went away when I got older and bigger and my brother left the house. But I can tell you right now, the effects remained, and they remain today. The compulsion to succeed, and this is true for others that I have spoken with, and it's true of some of the kids you will see. Compulsion to exceed, to be in control, to feel safe, is experienced as tremendously distressful. Just because a child is super focused or independent doesn't mean that she or he is not suffering. So when you look around at children in general, wherever your context is, keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons why I love to think about approaches being universal and personal, and I will come back to my final challenge to you in a moment. We are not the experts in healing. The children are. So, a friend of mine, her name was Sue Hall, was the best caregiver, and she later became a therapist, I have ever known. She loved kids. Sue always saw the unlimited potential in young people and somehow could get into their heads and understand through their eyes the monsters that they saw, that they confronted. So I want to give you an example of her belief in kids' resiliencies and their natural abilities to know what to do. Her experts, the ones who taught her, were the kids themselves. She kept a book of solutions. Now, one would think that this resource was written and published by a professional expert. No. It was a collection of solutions that kids themselves developed to face their own problems, to address their own problems. Think about the genius in this. Not only are these young authors' experiences validated, but for other children, this is a way to know that they're not alone. So one of the things that she did, she had, when she was a child care worker, she had responsibility for taking care of a little girl. The girl was 2 or 3 years old. She was recently adopted from the People's Republic of China. And she was uncontrollable. Well, as uncontrollable as a 2-year-old can be. What Sue figured out was that the child didn't know what to do with so much freedom, with so much space. So she gave her a cardboard box. And that little girl climbed into that cardboard box every single day. She seemed to be very content in her box. Weeks went by, and slowly but surely, she came out of the box. That was what that little girl needed, to feel safe and secure, to begin to trust her environment and know that she would be okay on the outside. We've talked a lot about this, and I'm glad that we did. What is your name? Thank you for your comments. I think you're absolutely right on topic. I think that injury and healing are culture bound. We often act as if there is only one truly correct narrative of injury, illness, cure, and recovery. A person experiences symptoms, is diagnosed, undergoes treatment, and symptoms are reduced or controlled. That's our general model. But we know that the definitions and meaning of illness differ between individuals, and they differ between groups of people. And pathways to healing are similarly culturally bound. So we know that oftentimes Western medicine doesn't make sense to a new immigrant here. My spouse is Chinese. She's an immigrant. She just came out of the hospital, and her mother, of course, started calling her immediately and asking her whether she was eating hot food or cold food. That's not actually physically hot or physically cold food. It's food that generates heat or, right? So, you know, and she wasn't eating the right thing, and she needed to eat the right thing. So to the degree that my spouse has lived in that definition of illness and wellness, she's more likely to recover for no other reason than her expectation. So I have a young colleague who is Native American. He told me a story about one of his worst experiences in childhood. He's a clinical psychologist now, and he's a native healer. As an adolescent, he went to see a psychologist, and during that first interview, he talked to the psychologist about his love of hunting. That was his way of finding peace and his connection to the earth. He was embracing a healing strategy that was comfortable, known to himself and to the people that he grew up with on his reservation. The psychologist, however, reflected that his love of hunting was a reflection also of his desire to torture animals, and this revealed psychopathic tendencies. This was incredibly damaging to him, to be stripped of his values and told that his values were wrong and dangerous and sick. So we need to understand the cultural baggage we bring into this work. that we bring into the interactions we have with youth and children. We are responsible for educating ourselves to do our own work so that we can listen and hear. And I would like to say, and I've had this conversation several times, that we have little or no understanding about the additional impact of persistent bias and discrimination among young people who already have direct experience of traumatic events. That intersection we need to think about and to explore. Here's my fifth lesson. We all are healers. Again, Rachel Naomi said, healing is a potential in all relationships and at all times. Our power to heal is far less limited than our power to cure. Our power to heal is far less limited than our power to cure. Healing is not a relationship between an expert and a problem. It is a relationship between human beings. It doesn't matter who you are or what your job is or how much clinical training you may or may not have had. It doesn't matter whether you are a custodian, a therapist, a teacher, a friend, or a family member. Every single time you interact with a child, you have the potential to harm or to heal. No interaction can ever be assumed to have no effect. This is your responsibility, my responsibility, all of our responsibilities. Being kind, saying something supportive, or bearing witness in silence, all can heal. You have to believe that in each interaction, you have an opportunity to change a young person's life. You may never know the effect you have had, but believe me, you are so important. Choose to be a healer. Please love them all. Thank you.
So folks, we've come to the end of this road. You are the soldiers who made it to the end. And we have a reward for you soldiers.
You do.
There are refreshments for those who at this hour of the day enjoy one. And they're in the courtroom, which is just adjacent. I want to remind you again, I hope everybody got whatever they needed for parking. I'll remind you again that we'll do the write-up, and it'll be on the website, both the CLiME website and the Inequality.com blog. If we have your information because you registered, we will also send it out that way. I think we're working on some kind of a podcast that will also be on the site if you want to share with others. You know, it's obviously going to be intervention and prevention. And it's going to take all of us. And sorry?
And advocacy.
And advocacy, yes. So, you know, it's a long road ahead, but we'll do it together. And I'm just so grateful that you all were here today to share this very important set of moments together. I wish you the best. I hope to see you again soon. And if you can't stay with us, take care and farewell. See you soon.
Thank you.
So, do we put the tickets in on our way out of the garage? Okay.
I'm not in that garage.
Yes, but it's on the, you put it in on the way out, right? Not on the way in. Okay.
When you're in your
No,
car.
When you're in the car, yeah. Bye-bye, have a good weekend.
I'm not walking that way.
You're not in the garage?
No, I'm not in the garage because I went to
There's like so much I want to talk about.
I know. What if we
Oh, I thought I saw you this morning, and then you
saw
kind
me.
of disappeared.
I disappeared all day, you know, one of the bigger days.
Yeah. Really, really interesting stuff. He's really interesting, and I get where he's coming from.
Don't forget the book.
No, I won't, thank you. But in a way, he blew it up in a way that made it feel, the problems that everybody talks about. But if you interrogate them structurally, I think you have to. And that isn't what the rest of the day is. The rest of the day concentrated on school. Let me just take this because I have
This is what I'm piecing together. I don't know that it's happening, but I have a little pieces of evidence. In the ill of advocacy on desegregation.
because of school funding or for a variety of reasons. Okay. Right.
I did a fair of retirement for Paul Tractor for weeks, and half of it was uptown, and I've heard some of this in preparing for it and hearing. Now, I don't know what Saturdays, but retired justice and Elise probably this other, the woman who's running the program is very much into it, and others are a professor at Rutgers, Blouse,
What's the remedy that they're looking for? Busing between the city and the Sunday? Because that's a long way to go. I
don't know. Paul's remedy is forced integration of districts.
Well, but you can integrate a district and still have neighborhood schools, and it doesn't. But the money will be different, right?
So I don't know more than this, but I also know that the lawsuit within the area of like public education for this. And I have a feeling that this conference is part of it. I stumbled. That is, when I was doing Paul's retirement, Paul retired a year and 5 months ago. But he did it sort of quickly.
Maybe because he was planning, he knew he was going to get involved in this.
But I knew I wanted to do something that was substantive, not just bunches of accolades.
Right.
We did